The morning sun filtered through the gauze curtains of my sister's chamber, casting golden patterns across the scattered silk and pearls that littered the marble floor. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart hammering against my ribs as I took in the scene before me: overturned jewelry boxes, an open wardrobe with gowns spilling out like colorful waterfalls, and in the center of it all, a crumpled letter bearing my sister's delicate handwriting. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I cannot marry him, Adrian. I cannot. My hands trembled as I held the parchment, Elena's words blurring before my eyes. The wedding was in 3 hours. 3 hours until the carriage would arrive to take the bride to the Cathedral of St. Celeste, where Duke Kieran Blackthorne of Ravenmore would be waiting at the altar. Young Master Adrian? I spun around to find Marta, Elena's personal maid, standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Her usually pristine uniform was wrinkled, and her graying hair had escaped its neat bun. "Where is she?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. "Gone, my lord. She left before dawn with nothing but a traveling cloak and a small purse." Marta's voice broke. She said she'd rather die than marry the Devil Duke. The Devil Duke. That's what they called him in the taverns and marketplaces, Duke Kieran Blackthorne, the man who supposedly crushed rebellions with his bare hands and whose very presence could freeze a person's blood. Stories followed him like shadows, of villages burned, of nobles who crossed him and were never seen again, of a curse that had claimed his first wife's life, but those were just stories, weren't they? I sank onto Elena's velvet chaise, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The political marriage between our kingdoms had been arranged months ago, a union meant to secure peace between Astoria and Ravenmore after decades of border disputes. My father, Duke Alaric Rosehaven, had been so proud when the proposal came from the Blackthorne court. Elena would be a duchess, our family's status elevated, our people safe. Now it was all crumbling to dust. "The Duke of Astoria requests your immediate presence in his study," Marta said quietly. He knows." I closed my eyes, imagining my father's face when he discovered Elena's betrayal. The rage, the disappointment, the crushing weight of political catastrophe. Our family would be disgraced. The alliance would crumble. There might even be war. But more than that, I thought of Elena, who had always been the perfect daughter, the perfect lady, the perfect sacrifice for our kingdom's needs. She had smiled through dancing lessons and etiquette classes, through dress fittings and diplomatic dinners, never once complaining about the life that had been chosen for her. Until now. She had finally chosen herself. I stood on shaking legs and made my way through the familiar halls of Rosehaven Manor, past portraits of stern ancestors and tapestries depicting our family's noble history. Each step felt like walking to my own execution. I found my father in his study, slumped in his leather chair with his head in his hands. Documents were scattered across his mahogany desk, and an empty wineglass sat among them. He looked older than his 52 years, his dark hair streaked with more silver than I remembered, his shoulders bowed under an invisible weight. "Father?" He looked up, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: desperation. "Adrian." His voice was hoarse. "Sit down." I took the chair across from him, my hands folded in my lap like a child awaiting punishment. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken consequences. "She's gone," he said finally. "Your sister has destroyed everything our family has worked toward for generations. Maybe she had her reasons." "Reasons?" Father's fist slammed against the desk, making the inkwell jump. "What reasons could justify throwing away the peace of two kingdoms? What reasons could justify the disgrace she's brought upon our house?" I wanted to defend her, to speak of love and choice and the right to determine one's own fate. But the words died in my throat as I saw the genuine anguish in my father's eyes. "There's more," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Duke Blackthorne's men arrived an hour ago. They're waiting in the East Wing. If there's no bride..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. My blood turned to ice. What will happen? War, most likely. The Blackthorn court will see this as an insult beyond forgiveness. They'll claim we broke the treaty in bad faith. He rubbed his temples. And they'd be right. I stared at him, my mind racing. There had to be something we could do, some way to salvage this disaster. My thoughts turned to Elena's letter, to her desperation, to the fear that had driven her to abandon everything she'd ever known. And then, like a bolt of lightning, an impossible idea struck me. What if? I began, then stopped, the words too insane to voice. What if what, Adrian? I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to suggest would change everything. What if Elena didn't run away? What if she simply fell ill? A sudden fever, perhaps. Too sick to travel but expected to recover soon. Father frowned. That might buy us time, but eventually, what if, I interrupted, my heart pounding so hard I could barely think, what if Elena recovered just in time for the wedding? What if she was there, veiled and properly dressed, ready to marry the Duke? Understanding dawned in my father's eyes, followed immediately by horror. Adrian, no. You can't possibly be suggesting. I'm her twin brother, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. We've been mistaken for each other since we were children. With the right dress, the right veil, the right posture, no one would know. You're mad. Father stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Even if such a deception were possible, which it isn't, what then? How long do you think you could maintain such a charade? Long enough, I said, though I had no idea what that meant. Long enough to prevent a war. Long enough to find another solution. Father turned to face me, and I saw something flickering in his expression, not approval, but desperate consideration. Adrian, you're talking about marrying a man. Living as his wife. The implications. I know. My voice was steady, though my hands were shaking. I know what I'm suggesting. We stared at each other across the study, the weight of impossible choices hanging between us. In the distance, I could hear the sound of horses' hooves and carriage wheels on cobblestones. The world was moving forward, whether we were ready or not. The Duke's men, Father said quietly. They'll be expecting to escort the bride to the cathedral within the hour. I nodded, my decision crystallizing like ice in my veins. Then we'd better get me dressed. Elena's wedding dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace, with a bodice that gleamed like moonlight and a skirt that seemed to float rather than merely hang. As Marta and two other maids worked to lace me into it, I tried not to think about how this gown had been crafted to celebrate my sister's new life and how it was now becoming the costume for my own elaborate deception. Your ladyship must breathe shallowly, Marta whispered, pulling the corset tighter. The Duke's men mustn't suspect anything amiss. I nodded, though the title felt like a weight on my shoulders. For the next few hours, or however long this madness lasted, I would be Lady Elena Rosehaven, beloved daughter, dutiful bride, and everything I had never been trained to be. The physical transformation was startling. The corset cinched my waist and created the illusion of feminine curves beneath the flowing silk. Elena's shoes fit surprisingly well, though the heels made me feel precarious and strange. The maids had powdered my face with cosmetics, darkening my lashes and rouging my cheeks until I looked like a porcelain doll. But it was the veil that completed the illusion. Layer upon layer of delicate lace cascaded from a pearl-encrusted tiara, obscuring my features while still allowing me to see. In the mirror, I looked like a ghost, ethereal, mysterious, feminine. My lady, one of the younger maids breathed, you look beautiful. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but my throat felt too tight. This was really happening. In less than an hour, I would be standing at the altar of Saint Celeste, promising to love, honor, and obey a man I'd never met, a man who thought he was marrying someone else entirely. Father appeared in the doorway, resplendent in his formal court attire. His face was a mask of grim determination, but I caught the flash of pride in his eyes as he looked at me. "You look exactly like her," he said quietly. "Adrian, are you certain about this?" Was I certain? I wasn't certain about anything anymore. But I nodded anyway, because uncertainty was a luxury we couldn't afford. "Remember," Father continued, "speak as little as possible. Keep your voice soft if you must talk. The ceremony is brief, you need only repeat the vows when prompted. After that." He trailed off, clearly as lost as I was about what would happen after. A knock at the door interrupted us. "My lord," came a deep voice from the hallway. "The Duke's escort is ready to depart." My heart nearly stopped. The Duke's escort. I had been so focused on getting through the ceremony that I hadn't considered the journey to the cathedral or the fact that I would be traveling with men who served my future husband. "Coming," Father called back, then turned to me. "Adrian, it's not too late to." "It is too late," I said, and meant it. Elena was gone. The alliance hung in the balance. There was no turning back now. The corridor seemed endless as we made our way toward the main entrance. My silk slippers whispered against the marble floor, and the heavy skirts rustled with each step. I had to concentrate on walking gracefully, on keeping my shoulders straight and my head held high the way Elena always did. The main hall of Rosehaven Manor was filled with people as servants, minor nobles, and in the center of it all, 3 men in black and silver livery. They wore the colors of House Blackthorn, and their very presence seemed to darken the room. The tallest of them stepped forward as we approached. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sharp features and eyes like winter storms. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, and his hand rested casually on the pommel of his sword. "Lady Elena," he said, bowing deeply. "I am Sir Marcus Ashford, captain of His Grace's personal guard. I have come to escort you to your wedding." I curtsied as gracefully as I could manage, keeping my eyes downcast. "Sir Marcus," I whispered, pitching my voice as high and soft as possible. "His Grace sends his apologies for not greeting you personally," Sir Marcus continued. "He awaits you at the cathedral." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The captain's gaze felt like it could pierce through my veil and see every secret I carried. But after a moment, he stepped back and gestured toward the ornate carriage waiting outside. The carriage was magnificent and intimidating in equal measure. Black lacquered wood adorned with silver fittings, pulled by 4 massive horses that seemed to have been bred for war rather than ceremony. The blackthorn coat of arms, a raven perched on a thorned crown, was emblazoned on the doors. Sir Marcus helped me into the carriage with the courtesy due to a lady, though I noticed how his eyes lingered on my veiled figure. Did he suspect something? Or was he simply being thorough in his duties? Father squeezed my gloved hand briefly before stepping back. "Godspeed, my daughter." The carriage lurched into motion, and I pressed my face to the window to watch Rosehaven Manor disappear behind us. It might be the last time I ever saw my childhood home. The thought should have terrified me, but instead I felt strangely numb, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. "Lady Elena," Sir Marcus said from the seat across from me, "His Grace wanted me to convey his gratitude for your willingness to proceed with the ceremony despite the difficulties." Difficulties? My heart skipped. "I'm sorry?" "The illness that delayed your departure this morning. His Grace was concerned for your health." "Ah. The cover story. I am quite recovered, thank you." "Excellent. His Grace will be pleased." Sir Marcus leaned back, apparently satisfied. "If I may say so, my lady, you are fortunate in your betrothed. The Duke is a good man, despite what the gossips might say." I found myself genuinely curious. "What do they say?" "Foolish things. That he's cursed, that he's cruel, that he murdered his first wife." Sir Marcus's expression darkened. "All lies, spread by those who fear his power or resent his success." The truth is that Duke Kirin is one of the most honorable men I've ever served. His first wife, I ventured carefully. What happened to her? Fever took her, 2 years after their marriage. His Grace was devastated. Sir Marcus's voice softened. He hasn't been the same since. Perhaps that's why he seems cold to those who don't know him well. I processed this information, trying to reconcile it with the monster Elena had described in her letter. A man who had loved and lost, who carried his grief like armor. It was not what I had expected. The Cathedral of St. Celeste loomed before us, its twin spires reaching toward the gray sky like supplicating hands. Crowds had gathered outside, nobles in their finest clothes, common folk hoping for a glimpse of the spectacle, and what seemed like half the kingdom's army providing security. My mouth went dry. All these people, all these witnesses to what was about to happen. There would be no backing out now, no changing my mind at the last moment. The carriage stopped, and Sir Marcus opened the door. Lady Elena, we have arrived. I took his offered hand and stepped out into the cool afternoon air. The crowd's murmur rose to a dull roar as they caught sight of me, and I heard scattered calls of beautiful. And God bless the bride. If only they knew. The cathedral's massive doors stood open, revealing an interior lit by hundreds of candles. The scent of incense and roses wafted out, along with the soft sound of organ music. At the end of the impossibly long aisle, I could see a figure waiting at the altar. Duke Kirin Blackthorn. My husband-to-be. Even from this distance, he cut an imposing figure. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in formal black with silver accents. His dark hair was pulled back severely, and his face was a mask of noble composure. He looked like he had been carved from stone, beautiful, intimidating, and utterly unmovable. Lady Elena? Sir Marcus offered his arm. Are you ready? I took a deep breath, feeling the corset restrict my lungs, and nodded. I am ready. The lie came so easily now. I wondered if I would ever be able to tell the truth again. The cathedral was a symphony of light and shadow, its soaring arches disappearing into darkness high above while countless candles cast dancing golden pools on the marble floor. Every pew was filled with nobility from both kingdoms, their silk and jewels creating a tapestry of wealth and power that seemed to stretch endlessly on either side of the aisle. My hand trembled on Sir Marcus's arm as we began the slow procession toward the altar. Each step felt like walking through a dream or perhaps a nightmare. The organ music swelled around us, beautiful and mournful, and I had the strange sensation of marching to my own funeral. Through the layers of lace that veiled my face, I could see Duke Kirin more clearly with each step. He was younger than I had expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw. His dark hair was indeed pulled back in a severe style, but a few rebellious strands had escaped to frame his face. He stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, watching my approach with an expression I couldn't read. When we reached the altar, Sir Marcus bowed and stepped back, leaving me alone before the Duke. The Archbishop of St. Celeste, resplendent in his ceremonial robes, smiled benevolently at us both. Dearly beloved, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the cathedral, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Lady Elena Rosehaven and Duke Kirin Blackthorn, in the sight of God and in the presence of these witnesses. I tried to focus on the Archbishop's words, but my attention kept drifting to the man beside me. Duke Kirin was taller than me even in Elena's heeled shoes, and he radiated a kind of controlled power that made the air around him feel charged. His scent reached me faintly, leather and cedar and something darker, more mysterious. Marriage is a sacred covenant, the Archbishop continued, not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. Sacred covenant. The words hit me like a physical blow. What I was doing was a mockery of everything this ceremony represented. I was deceiving not only the Duke but God himself, standing here in my sister's place and preparing to make vows I had no right to make. If any person can show just cause why these two should not be joined together in holy matrimony, the Archbishop intoned, let them speak now. or forever hold their peace. The cathedral fell silent. I held my breath, half expecting someone to leap up and denounce me as a fraud. But the moment passed, and the Archbishop smiled. Very well. Do, Kieran, do you take Lady Elena to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part? Duke Kieran's voice was deep and resonant, carrying easily through the cathedral. I do. Two simple words, but they seemed to echo through me like a bell. He had just promised to love and cherish me, except he thought I was someone else entirely. The weight of his commitment, given so freely to a lie, made my chest tighten with guilt. Lady Elena, the Archbishop said, turning to me, do you take Duke Kieran to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part? The words stuck in my throat. Everyone was watching, waiting. The Duke's pale eyes were fixed on my veiled face, and I thought I saw something gentle there, something that didn't match the stories of his cruelty. I do, I whispered. The rings, the Archbishop prompted. Sir Marcus stepped forward with a velvet cushion bearing 2 golden bands. The Duke took the smaller ring, my ring, and reached for my hand. His fingers were warm and steady as he slipped the band onto my finger, and I had to fight not to flinch at the contact. With this ring, I thee wed, he said solemnly. I fumbled slightly as I took his ring, my hands shaking despite my efforts to remain calm. The Duke's hand was larger than mine, his fingers long and elegant despite their obvious strength. As I slipped the ring onto his finger, I caught a glimpse of a scar across his knuckles, evidence of a life far more complicated than ceremony and court politics. With this ring, I thee wed, I repeated, my voice barely audible. By the power vested in me by God and the Church, the Archbishop declared, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. My heart stopped. In all my frantic planning, I had somehow forgotten about this moment. The Duke was turning toward me, his hands rising to lift my veil, and I realized with crystal clarity that I was about to be discovered. His fingers were gentle as they caught the edge of the lace, and for a moment that stretched like eternity, his eyes met mine through the layers of delicate fabric. Up close, I could see that his eyes weren't cold at all. They were the color of storm clouds, gray and blue and silver all at once, and they held a depth of emotion that took my breath away. He was beautiful. Not in the way of poets or princes, but in the way of carved marble and ancient oak trees, strong and weathered and utterly masculine. There was something in his expression, a vulnerability that he was trying to hide, that made my heart ache for reasons I couldn't name. The veil lifted, and I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable moment when he would realize I wasn't Elena, when he would denounce me before the entire cathedral, when everything would come crashing down. Instead, his lips touched mine. The kiss was soft, almost hesitant, as if he were afraid of frightening me. His mouth was warm and tasted faintly of wine, and the contact sent an electric shock through my entire body. It lasted only a moment, but in that moment, I felt something shift inside me, a flutter of feeling that I had never experienced before. When he pulled back, his eyes searched my face with an expression I couldn't decipher. Did he suspect? Had he noticed something amiss? But then he smiled, just a small curve of his lips, but it transformed his entire face, and offered me his arm. My lady, he said quietly, for my ears alone, shall we greet our guests? I nodded, not trusting my voice, and placed my hand on his arm. The contact sent another little shock through me, and I found myself hyper-aware of his presence beside me, his warmth, his strength, the controlled grace of his movements. The cathedral erupted in applause as we turned to face the crowd. Rose petals rained down from the gallery above, and the organ began a triumphant recessional. We walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, while hundreds of voices called out congratulations and blessings. I smiled and nodded as Elena would have done, but my mind was reeling. The kiss, brief as it was, had awakened something in me that I didn't understand. It wasn't just the deception anymore, it was the man beside me, the way he had looked at me, the gentleness in his touch. What was happening to me? Outside the cathedral, a second carriage waited, this one even more magnificent than the first, decorated with flowers and silk ribbons. The Duke handed me up into it with the same careful courtesy, then settled beside me. We were closer now in the intimate space of the carriage, and I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Are you well, my lady?" he asked as the carriage began to move. "You seem distant." I looked at him through my lashes, trying to channel Elena's grace. "I am simply overwhelmed, Your Grace. It has been quite a day." "Please," he said, and that small smile returned, "call me Kieran. We are married now, after all." Kieran. The name felt strange on my tongue, intimate and foreign at the same time. "Kieran," I repeated softly. He nodded approvingly. "Much better. And I shall call you Elena, if I may." My heart clenched at the sound of my sister's name from his lips. "Of course." We rode in comfortable silence for a while, watching the countryside roll past through the carriage windows. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and I realized that this was my wedding day, the strangest, most impossible wedding day in history. "Elena," Kieran said suddenly, "I want you to know that I understand this marriage was not of your choosing. I hope, in time, we might find some measure of happiness together." His words were so gentle, so unexpectedly kind, that I felt tears prick behind my eyes. Here was a man who had been painted as a monster, speaking to me with more consideration than I had ever received from the nobles of my own court. "Thank you," I managed. "That means more to me than you know." He studied my face with those storm gray eyes, and I had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through me. "You are not what I expected," he said finally. My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "I expected someone harder, more calculating. Political marriages rarely produce brides who seem so genuine." He paused, then added quietly, "I expected someone who would not weep at being married to the Devil Duke." I reached up instinctively to touch my cheek and found it damp with tears I hadn't realized I was shedding. "I'm sorry, I don't apologize." His voice was firm but not unkind. "Tears are honest. I prefer them to false smiles." The carriage began to slow, and I looked out the window to see our destination rising before us like something from a dark fairy tale. Blackthorn Castle was massive and imposing, its black stone walls seeming to absorb the dying light. Tall towers reached toward the sky, their windows glowing with warm light, and I could see the movement of guards along the battlements. It was beautiful in its own way, but it was also clearly a fortress, a place built to withstand siege and war. A place where secrets could be kept and lies could be buried. A place where I would have to somehow continue this impossible charade, living as the wife of a man who was already becoming more than just a stranger to me. "Welcome to your new home, Elena," Kieran said, his voice soft and perhaps a little sad. "I hope you will find some peace here." Peace. I almost laughed at the irony. I was about to enter the most dangerous phase of my deception, living in close quarters with a man who must never discover the truth about me. Peace was the last thing I could expect, but as the carriage drew to a stop and Kieran stepped out to offer me his hand, I found myself hoping for something else entirely. Not peace, but understanding. Not safety, but connection. As his fingers closed around mine, strong and warm and steady, I realized that somewhere in the space of a single afternoon, I had stopped thinking about Duke Kieran Blackthorn as a stranger I was deceiving. I was starting to think of him as a man I wanted to know. Blackthorn Castle loomed over us like a sleeping giant as our carriage passed through the massive iron gates. The courtyard was filled with servants and guards, all lined up in perfect formation to welcome their new duchess. Torches burned in iron sconces along the walls, casting dancing shadows that made the ancient stones seem alive. I stepped down from the carriage with Kieran's help, my silk slippers clicking against the worn cobblestones. The evening air was cooler here than it had been in the cathedral, carrying with it the scent of pine and stone and something else, something wild and untamed that spoke of the mountains that surrounded us. "My lady," said a woman stepping forward from the crowd of servants. She was perhaps 50 years old, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun and intelligent dark eyes. Her dress was simple but elegant, marking her as someone of importance in the household hierarchy. "I am Mrs. Blackwood, the head housekeeper. Welcome to Blackthorn Castle." I curtsied as gracefully as I could manage, still getting used to the weight of my skirts. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood. I am pleased to be here." "Mrs. Blackwood has been with my family for nearly 30 years, Kieran said, his hand resting lightly on my elbow. "She will help you settle in and answer any questions you might have about the castle." The housekeeper's gaze lingered on my face for a moment, and I wondered if she could see through my veil to the deception beneath. But then she smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her stern features. "His Grace has had the Duchess's chambers prepared according to your preferences, my lady. I hope you will find them to your liking." "My preferences?" I had no idea what preferences Elena might have expressed, but I nodded anyway. "I'm sure they will be perfect." Kieran gestured toward the castle's main entrance, where massive oak doors stood open to reveal a hall lit by chandeliers and warming fires. "Shall we go in? The evening grows cold, and you must be tired after such a long day." The great hall of Blackthorn Castle was breathtaking. The ceiling soared high above us, supported by carved beams that seemed to stretch into infinity. Tapestries depicting scenes of ancient battles and legendary hunts covered the stone walls, and a fire large enough to roast an ox burned in the enormous fireplace. It was a room built to impress and intimidate, to remind visitors of the power and history of House Blackthorn, but it was also clearly a room that was lived in. Books lay open on side tables, and I could see the comfortable indentations in the cushions of the chairs near the fire. This wasn't just a showpiece, it was a home. "The castle is quite old," Kieran explained as we walked through the hall. "Parts of it date back nearly 500 years. My ancestors added to it over the centuries, but they were always careful to preserve its character." I found myself genuinely interested despite my nerves. "It's magnificent. I can feel the history in the stones." He glanced at me with something that might have been surprise. "You appreciate old places?" "I do. They tell stories that new buildings cannot." I paused, realizing I had perhaps revealed too much of my own interests rather than Elena's. "I've always been fascinated by history." "Then you and I have something in common," he said, and I caught a note of pleasure in his voice. "I'll show you the library tomorrow, if you'd like. It contains some truly remarkable volumes." The offer sent an unexpected thrill through me. Elena had always found reading tedious, but I had spent countless hours in my father's library, losing myself in tales of adventure and romance. The thought of exploring Kieran's collection was genuinely exciting. "I would like that very much," I said, and meant it. We climbed a wide stone staircase, past portraits of previous dukes and duchesses of Blackthorn. They gazed down at us with serious expressions, as if weighing the worth of the new addition to their family. I tried not to meet their painted eyes, afraid they might somehow see through my disguise. "Your chambers are here," Kieran said, stopping before a door of polished walnut. "I hope you will find them comfortable." He opened the door and stepped aside to let me enter first. The room beyond took my breath away. It was clearly a duchess's chamber, large and elegantly appointed, but it was also surprisingly warm and welcoming. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting golden light across furniture upholstered in deep blues and silvers. Tall windows looked out over the castle gardens, though they were now dark with evening. Fresh flowers filled several vases, and I could see that someone had laid out a selection of books on a small table by the window seat. "It's beautiful," I whispered, and I meant it. The room felt like a sanctuary, a place where I might actually be able to rest and think and figure out how to navigate this impossible situation. "I'm glad you approve." Kieran's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I know this is all very new and perhaps overwhelming. I want you to feel at home here. I turned to face him, suddenly aware that we were alone together for the first time since the cathedral. The realization sent a flutter of nervousness through me. This was my wedding night, or at least it was supposed to be Elena's wedding night. What was expected of me? What did married couples do in the privacy of their chambers? The thought made my cheeks burn, and I was grateful for the veil that still partially concealed my face. Elena, Kieran said, stepping closer. Kieran said, stepping closer. His voice was gentle, almost careful. I want you to know that I have no expectations of you tonight. You've been through a great deal today, and I would not add to your burden by presuming. He trailed off, but I understood what he was saying. He was giving me time, space, the courtesy of not demanding immediate intimacy from a woman who was essentially a stranger to him. It was more consideration than I had dared hope for. Thank you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That is, very kind. He smiled, and again I was struck by how it transformed his face. Kindness costs nothing, Elena. Rest well. We'll have plenty of time to talk tomorrow. He moved toward the door, then paused. There is a connecting door between our chambers, he said, gesturing to a door I hadn't noticed before. It is locked from your side, and the key is on your dressing table. You need never fear that I will enter without your permission. With that, he bowed slightly and left me alone in my magnificent prison. I stood frozen in the center of the room for a long moment, overwhelmed by the events of the day. This morning I had been Adrian Rosehaven, second son of a duke, worried about nothing more pressing than my morning lessons. Now I was Duchess Elena Blackthorne, wife to a man who was nothing like the monster I had expected, trapped in a web of deception that grew more complex by the hour. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Come in, I called. Mrs. Blackwood entered, followed by two young maids carrying steaming buckets of water. I thought you might like a bath before retiring, Your Grace. It's been a long day. The title still felt strange, but I nodded gratefully. That sounds wonderful, thank you. The maids busied themselves preparing a copper tub that had been wheeled in from somewhere in the castle's depths. They poured in the hot water, added fragrant oils that filled the air with the scent of lavender and rose, and set out soft towels and a silk nightgown that was clearly Elena's. Will you need help undressing, Your Grace? One of the maids asked. My heart nearly stopped. Help undressing meant removing the elaborate wedding gown, the corset, the careful padding that had helped create the illusion of feminine curves. It meant exposing the deception that had brought me this far. No, I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. I prefer to manage on my own. Thank you. Mrs. Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. Of course, Your Grace. Ring the bell if you need anything. We'll return in the morning to help you dress. They left me alone, and I immediately went to the door and turned the heavy iron key in the lock. The sound echoed through the chamber with a finality that made my stomach clench. Removing the wedding dress was like peeling away layers of a dream. The silk whispered as it pulled around my feet, and I had to be careful not to damage the delicate fabric. The corset was more challenging. It took several minutes of awkward contortion to loosen the laces enough to breathe freely again. When I finally stepped into the warm bath, I felt like I was washing away not just the day's sweat and exhaustion, but Elena's identity itself. The hot water lapped against my skin, and for the first time in hours, I could breathe deeply without the restriction of women's clothing. I sank deeper into the tub, letting the warmth soak into my bones. What was I doing? This morning's desperate plan had seemed like the only option, but now, sitting in the Duchess's chambers of Blackthorn Castle, the full magnitude of my deception was beginning to sink in. I thought about Kieran's kindness, his gentle consideration, the way he had looked at me during the ceremony. He was nothing like the monster Elena had described in her letter. He was a man who deserved honesty, who deserved a real wife who could love him without reservation. Instead, he had gotten me. The water was beginning to cool when I finally climbed out and dried myself with the soft towels. The silk nightgown was another challenge. It was clearly designed for a woman's body, and I had to be careful about how it fit. But it was loose enough to conceal what needed to be concealed, and in the dim light of the chamber, it might pass casual inspection. I was sitting before the fire, trying to calm my racing thoughts, when I heard a soft sound from the direction of the connecting door. Footsteps, moving quietly through what must be Kieran's chamber. I held my breath, wondering if he would try the door, but the footsteps moved away again. Was he having trouble sleeping too? Was he thinking about the woman he had married, wondering about the life they might build together? The thought filled me with an unexpected ache. I must have dozed in the chair, because the next thing I knew, pale morning light was streaming through the tall windows. Birds were singing in the gardens below, and I could hear the distant sounds of the castle coming to life, servants moving through the corridors, guards changing shifts, the everyday bustle of a great household. My wedding night was over, survived without disaster. But now came the greater challenge, learning to live as Elena, to be a wife to a man who was becoming more intriguing with each passing hour. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Your Grace?" Mrs. Blackwood's voice called. "His Grace requests your presence at breakfast, if you are ready." Breakfast with Kieran. The thought sent a flutter of nervousness through me, but also something else, anticipation. "I'll be ready shortly," I called back, then hurried to the wardrobe to find something suitable to wear. Elena's clothes were all beautiful, but they were also clearly designed for a woman's figure. I chose a morning dress of deep blue silk, with a full skirt that would hide the differences in my hips and a high neckline that would conceal my throat.